Good morning. My name is Krista Ford. I'm an associate director here at JFF, and I'm so excited to be here today with Gorik Ng to discuss his book, The Unspoken Rules Secrets to Starting Your Career Off Right. Gorik, obviously, I read the book, I really enjoyed it, and I know that it's geared more towards young professionals. And while I wouldn't necessarily put myself in that category anymore, I think that the wisdom that you had to share is just so relevant, and a lot of it really resonated with me. Actually, my only piece of criticism about the book is that I wish it had been around 10 to 12 years ago when I was just starting off my career. But I would love to hand it over to you just to get your introduction and learn a little bit more about the book itself and some of its main themes.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much for having me, Krista. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm author of a new book out with Harvard Business Review Press called The Unspoken Rules Secrets to Starting Your Career Off Right, which I think of as the comprehensive guide on how to go from school to work successfully based on 500 interviews, over 500 interviews that I've conducted with professionals across geographies, industries, and job types on what they wish someone could have told them earlier about how to survive and thrive in the workplace. It covers everything from how to prepare for a new role even before your first day, all the way through to how to set yourself up for promotion, even if you're in an organization that doesn't have a natural career path for you. It covers everything from how to navigate one-on-ones, what questions to ask when you're delegated an assignment, how to manage up, how to manage expectations, how to navigate corporate politics, how to take on more responsibilities and take ownership. It's based on my own personal background as a first generation low income college student turned professional. And I wrote it after realizing that there's no guide on how to succeed once you show up. There are plenty of resources on how to get a job, but then once you show up, there's this there's this notion out there that, well, it's either sink or swim, or top performers are born, not developed. I'd like to question that, and I'd like to distill the behaviors, the talking points, the mindsets, the frameworks that separate top performers from mediocre performers. That's what this book is all about.
Absolutely. And Gorik, you touched on this a little bit, but I would love it if you could just speak to what inspired you to write the book and what you hope your audience will take away from it.
Sure thing. I'd say the motivation behind the book came from both the heart and the head, where from the heart, I was a first generation low income college student, proud son of a working class single mother who left school when she was 12 years old. I didn't know that this would be a part of my story at the time, but I actually wrote my first resume when I was 14 years old, when my mom was laid off from the sewing machine factory. I mention this not because I was successful in this process of going to the public library, Googling for jobs, learning how to write my first resume and cover letter, but because I was unsuccessful. I was applying all over the place. I was doing what many job seekers are doing. And I did so not realizing that there are a whole host of unspoken rules on how to navigate the job search. I realized along the way through mentors that there are also unspoken rules to getting into college and navigating college and getting a job. And then finally, once you're in the workplace, how to go from individual contributor to manager and beyond, how to ascend to positions of leadership. And so much of this is passed down from parent to child or from mentor to mentee, making for an unlevel playing field between the insiders who get in and get ahead and the outsiders, folks like me and so many others, who end up stumbling through the trial and error. So as I reflected upon the privilege that I had accumulated over time, going from first generation low income college student to Harvard undergrad to management consultant to an MBA at Harvard and beyond, I started wondering, well, what responsibility do I have to pave a smoother path for those coming after me? So that's the motivation from the heart. And then when it comes to the motivation from the head, I started doing a lot of self-reflection when I was in my first job about just how much that we all learn through trial and error that brings us from not knowing what we don't know to all of a sudden feeling like certain ways of doing things in the workplace are just common sense and not worth passing down. And I started thinking about how so much of the training that one gets as an entry-level employee is trapped inside of really just a handful of companies that have the resources and departments and talent to be able to create robust onboarding programs. Folks like consulting firms, large financial institutions, Fortune 500 companies, which then brought up the question of, wow, if there's so much that's locked inside of these well-resourced companies, what does training and onboarding and learning development look like at small, medium-sized businesses? What does it look like in the nonprofit world, in the public sector? What if I could take what one learns in these highly structured environments and democratize it to the world? To what extent could we help folks not only get up to speed, but also help folks from underrepresented backgrounds ascend to positions of leadership, feel a greater sense of belonging, and become the high performers that they have the potential to become? So when I thought about the heart and the head, it came together and out came the book.
And I'm so glad it did. I have my copy right here. And, the book is so full of, sounds like hard won and also really well researched advice. And I'm wondering, I know this will be hard to do, but if you could maybe just identify like your top 3 pieces of advice for young professionals, what would those be?
You're right. It is tough to distill it all down. There are 20 unspoken rules and over 200 pages of content, but my 3 favorite ones are the following. The first is the main framework of the book, which is a framework that I call the 3 C's, which stand for competence, commitments, and compatibility. And the idea is this: the minute you show up in the professional world, whether it's in a resume, a cover letter, in a coffee chat, in an interview, and certainly in your first day, week, month, and year in a new job, you're being sized up. And the people around you are asking themselves 3 questions. Question 1 is, can you do this job well, which is competence? Question 2 is, are you excited to be here, which is commitment? And question 3 is, do we get along, which is compatibility? Competence, commitment, compatibility, the 3 C's. Your job, all of our jobs, is to convince the people around us to answer yes to all 3 questions all the time. That's what it takes to build trust, unlock opportunities, and to get closer to achieving your career goals, because you need to show that you're competent in order for people to entrust you with more important responsibilities. You need to show that you're committed in order for people to want to invest in your career. And you need to flex your compatibility skills in order for people to want to be invested in you as a person and also to be around you at work. So that being the North Star, I'd encourage job seekers as well as the managers who will ultimately manage this young talent to be mindful of all 3 C's, because it is the hidden criteria for what it takes to build trust in the workplace. The second favorite concept in the book is this idea of understanding what matters to those who matter. Because the better you understand what matters to those who matter, the better you can position yourself against work that matters. And the more you can perform work that matters, the more you will matter. So as an early career professional, even though you may be an intern, a co-op, an apprentice, someone who's at the bottom of the totem pole, there is an opportunity for you to understand what your manager's priorities are, your team's priorities are, your department's priorities are, your company or organization's priorities are. And this then translates into tip number 3, or favorite concept number 3, which is to be able to see the big picture. And this is what I mean by understanding how your role fits in with the team, how your team fits in with a company, and how your company fits in with the broader industry. So this means understanding what your organization does, who its partners, clients, competitors are, what it's been up to recently, and what it's trying to achieve. So even though no one tells you to be doing this research, no one tells you to be keeping these things in mind, what I've noticed in my 500 interviews is that the top performers at work really are able to engage on this more strategic level, that they're able to see the significance of their work beyond just what they're being assigned, And as a result, they're able to take ownership, which is another concept that I talk about a lot in the book.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know that the book is geared toward kind of early career professionals, but I want to shift gears a little bit because I do think a lot of the lessons included also have relevance for employers and for training providers. And so I was wondering if you could touch on your thoughts around how training providers can really help learners be more workplace ready, and then how employers can help young professionals be successful as they transition into the workplace.
Absolutely appreciate the two-sidedness of this question because it very much is a two-way street. It's not just about enabling the individual to be successful, but it's also about empowering leaders to create the conditions where everyone can thrive and not just the few. And when it comes to what organizations can do, it's to recognize that so much of what separates top performers from mediocre performers is a function of tacit knowledge. It's locked up inside of the minds of your top performers, and it's not often translated unless you have a good mentor at work or you have a parent who's able to pass down some of these unspoken rules. And so my encouragement to employers is to get more granular on what the approaches are that separate top performers from mediocre performers. We often hear from employers about the importance of soft skills or power skills or human skills or interpersonal skills or professional skills. There's so many acronyms, or rather there's so many synonyms for this topic. And one of the things that I started realizing is actually there is an archetype of what it means to be a high performer at work. You're someone who's proactive. You're someone who takes ownership. You're someone who can manage expectations. You're someone who is able to and will do what you promised you would do. And so when we think about these so-called soft skills or whichever other synonym you choose to use, what I've uncovered in these 500 interviews is, yes, we can actually get to a more granular understanding of what these skills are. And I'll give you an example, which is a framework in the book that I call why, what, how, by when. And the idea is when you're delegated an assignment, it's important to understand four things. One, why is this assignment being given in the first place? So what's the broader objective to this assignment? Question two is, what do I need to do? Question three is, how do I need to do it? And question four is, by when do I need to get it done? And I'm thinking back now, I'm having some flashbacks to my first job where I would be delegated an assignment. I would be smiling and nodding, not knowing what's being expected of me. Little did I know that I was on the verge of not doing the right work, not doing it the right way, or not doing it on time. And when I look around at the high performers at work, they're going through a song and dance of managing their manager through this process. So they're going through this mental checklist of sorts and asking themselves, oh, my manager hasn't clarified the deadline. That's an opportunity for me to say, Krista, this sounds like a great assignment. Just so you're aware, I've got this and this priority on my plate as well. Would it make sense for me to continue this afterwards at the end of the week, or would it make more sense for me to prioritize this now? And I noticed that you're going to be on vacation next week, so would it make sense for us to check in by Monday instead of next Wednesday? And oh, by the way, would it make sense for us to talk to Justine as well and have her point of view on this assignment before I go ahead and venture too far? When we think about the top performers at work, they're doing these things. It's just that these expectations aren't explicitly communicated to early career professionals. And so when I pivot over to what individuals can do, certainly managers and leaders and HR departments and learning and development professionals can demystify so much of this tacit knowledge. But it's also part of an individual's responsibility to look left, look right, observe the norms of the workplace, and to uncover some of these unspoken rules on their own, to not take those written expectations or those spoken expectations for granted. So much of what is expected of you will be unspoken.
Yes, absolutely. That's totally true. And I kind of want to stay on this thread of, a two-way street and workers and employers kind of meeting in the middle. But I want to switch the context a little bit to focus on, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. it's such a hot topic right now. And I really like that very early on in the book, you acknowledge the existence and the role of unconscious bias and inequities in the workplace. And I actually want to share just a really brief section of the book. It's just a few lines, but it's super impactful. So, right in chapter one, you mention there are examples of patterns that have been formally studied and verified scientifically. It's disappointing to hear, but the following statements are true. Women often walk a tightrope of needing to be both likable, so not too masculine, and competent, so not too feminine. Black people tend to be more closely monitored at work than white people are, and people with easy to pronounce names tend to be evaluated more positively than people with difficult to pronounce names. And I love this next line. You say, is this fair? No. And do we need a better system? Yes. And then you go on to say, your uniqueness is not a liability, it's an asset. And in fact, it's a superpower waiting to be unleashed. And, you know, as a young woman of color, a lot of that really resonates. And throughout the book, you give really practical tips for how young professionals from diverse backgrounds can navigate bias in the workplace. And, you know, this also brings to mind this concept of dual transformation, which is a notion we, you know, really believe in at JFF. And so it's this concept of acknowledging and really working within our current set of realities while also striving to create better systems. And really sitting in that tension and working in that space between where we are and where we want to be, and kind of how things are and how things should be. And like I said, you know, I think those that one line, just is this fair? No. And do we need a better system? Yes, kind of sums up that whole notion of dual transformation. And so I think, you know, that excerpt and this concept of dual transformation kind of brings to mind two questions. And so the first one is, what can employers do to really create a culture and an environment that fosters true diversity and inclusion, where workers really feel safe to show up as their authentic selves? And then the follow on to that is, what's the value in doing that? Like, what's the value to employers? Why should they be intentional about diversity and inclusion, and even prioritize diversity and inclusion? And you know, along those lines, when you say uniqueness is not a liability and it's actually a superpower waiting to be unleashed, what does that mean, and kind of how does that fit into the conversation?
Really appreciate the question, Krista. It's such an important topic, and I'm thrilled that that particular passage stood out to you because I got really fired up when I was writing it myself. Um, when it comes to creating more inclusive work environments, I would say the first is to recognize that whether you recognize it or not, from my research, there is going to be the three C's that loom above our heads and govern so many of our interpersonal interactions in the workplace. And so when I think about the performance evaluation processes at many companies, yes, there may be a checklist, or in many cases, there's really just an informal conversation that happens behind closed doors. My encouragement to employers, my hope for employers, is that they can take a more granular view at how competence is being expressed in the workplace. What does it look like, sound like to be committed? And are those evaluations fair? And then on compatibility, my encouragement is for folks to ask themselves, well, how important is compatibility as it relates to one's performance at work? Are we providing inclusive work environments where everyone can express all three C's all the time? And I'm going to blend my answer between the first and second questions here, because I think a lot about meetings at work, where depending on who you are, to the passage you read, different people are going to have different abilities to travel to the center of those three circles in this Venn diagram of the three C's. Some people may already be at the center, given their racial, gender, sexual orientation, other forms of identity. They might already be at the center just because they look like, talk like, or have the same backgrounds and interests as their coworkers. Others, outsiders, whether socioeconomically or from all these other forms of identity may be very distant from the center of those three C's. And it may not actually even be possible for them to travel to the center on their own without the involvement of their coworkers. I think a lot about meetings at work and just how much of our three C's are on full display. And I also think about how different people are going to be able to navigate these spaces more or less effectively, depending on who they are and who they're around. So one of the realizations I had is that just because someone isn't speaking up in a meeting doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. It could be that they're in the presence of longer, rambling, louder talking, higher ranking coworkers who are able to speak more confidently just because of who they are and who they're around. In which case, we will often conflate confidence for competence. And so we'll hear someone speak and we'll think to ourselves, wow, this person has their act together. They know so much about what's going on. They must be super competent, not realizing we're actually conflating competence for confidence. And so when I think about an environment like that, I think of a couple of situations. I think of folks who don't speak up, not because they don't have anything to say, but because of the work environment that they're in. I think about individuals who speak up and whose comments aren't internalized. I'm thinking of women and people of color who may speak up in meetings only for someone else to speak up 10 seconds later or 5 minutes later, make the exact same comment and get all the credit. And then I also think about after meetings where work is assigned and how women and people of color end up having a higher tendency to be delegated what are called non-promotable tasks or office housework, tasks like taking notes, organizing the holiday party, tasks that will make the team operate more effectively, but that might not necessarily get you promoted. And so in a situation like that, where we think about what's happening in the meeting and after the meeting, there's so much that both sides can and should be doing to level the playing field. On the part of employers, it's to recognize that perceptions don't necessarily reflect reality. So again, just because someone isn't speaking up doesn't mean they don't have anything to say. Could be the circumstances that are surrounding this individual. And then on the individual side, it's to recognize that there is unfortunately this unlevel playing field. And so there's this dual transformation, to your point, that's required. So when I think about not just recognizing the problem, but then ultimately solving it and why to solve it in the first place, well, I think about how much of what is shared in meetings in the workplace is trapped inside the heads of your employees. I think of a broader study, not based on workplace per se, but this notion of lost Einsteins, of there being so many capable people out there who have the potential to become the next CEOs or the new generation of scientists and entrepreneurs, and how as a result of one zip code, them not being able to reach their full potential. That's on a societal level, and there being these Einsteins who have the capabilities, but who just aren't offered the opportunity. Well, I think about that in the workplace as well, where how many lost Einsteins or overlooked Einsteins do you have in the workplace who have great ideas, who may have the key to unlocking your next business goals and objectives, but who aren't able to express their ideas because of them not feeling a sense of belonging, of them not being heard when spoken, of them, essentially not feeling like this is a place for them. So I feel like every organization has these overlooked Einsteins in the same way that our society has these lost Einsteins.
Thank you so much for that. I really love that idea of like the meeting as a microcosm of the workplace. And I love that you were able to share some really concrete, strategies that employers can use, because I think this concept of DEI is thought of as this very like nebulous kind of like sticky subject, but you just made that so plain and simple. I really appreciate just the the practical advice there.
Appreciate
Um,
that.
and so I want to switch gears one last time, and I want to kind of talk about our current context and the pandemic. Thankfully, we have vaccines now. things are getting a lot better, and we're not necessarily returning to normal, but trying to figure out a new normal. And a lot of us are returning to the workplace, but on the other hand, there are also a lot of changes that are here to stay. And so as we kind of think about how work has been evolving already even before the pandemic, but certainly has kind of continued to change in this current context. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the top skills that workers will need to succeed in this kind of rapidly evolving economy and labor market.
Yeah, I would say broadly, and I suspect many folks would agree that soft skills are important. And again, whether it's soft skills or any other synonym for this type of skills, going to be critical as more routine and cognitive skills, or rather cognitive positions, get automated uh, or get outsourced or offshored. It's going to be important to do what we humans do best, which is to communicate, to problem solve, to do so much of what machines aren't able to do. So that's on the 30,000-foot level. I then think about the three C's and just how important it is to know where one fits in with this Venn diagram and how they can express what individuals can do to better navigate these three C's in this new environment. But when I think about competence in particular, it brings us back slightly to one of my favorite concepts in the book of knowing what matters to those who matter and seeing the big picture. Where over the course of the pandemic, we have, I think, had a productive conversation that I hope will continue around essential workers. And I think it's shine a light on workers in the workplace in our labor market who are often overlooked but are essential. But I think it's also shined a light on, even in white collar professions, which positions are dispensable versus indispensable. And it's also shined a light on entire organizations and which ones that we may have looked to as being stable companies and not so stable companies. So as all of these different tectonic plates shift around us, not only in terms of the stability and longevity of our positions, but the stability and longevity of entire organizations that can have their fortunes overturned overnight. There's the skill of being able to see the big picture, identify opportunities, and then to ultimately position oneself for the work. So when I think about this, I think of being able to see your role not merely as a salesperson or a marketing analyst or a financial analyst or a marketing person or whichever other professions. But so seeing it not as a position, not seeing it as these are the tasks that I need to get done, but rather as these are the problems that I can help solve in this organization. Being able to go from task orientation to goal orientation, or from assignment orientation to problem orientation is going to be so important as job descriptions blur, as industries change, as positions evolve. Being able to stay nimble in this way and to understand what's going on around you and then ultimately positioning yourself for what's next is going to be critical. Also something that isn't taught in school and that high performers at work are able to do, to do this navigation without being told. How do we equip more people with this type of mindset and ability? That becomes the question.
Absolutely. I think if this past year and a half has taught us anything, it is absolutely the value of problem solving. So I love that piece of advice. Gorick, we're kind of winding down here, and it's been wonderful speaking with you. I'm wondering if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to leave us with.
Yeah, I would say that high performers are developed, not born. And so much of what we take for granted or just assume to be the case, such as, well, you either have it or you don't, or this is a sink or swim environment. Well, so much of what I've realized over the course of doing this research is that we may take these top performers for granted as we got to find them and we got to bring them in. not necessarily as skills and behaviors and mindsets that we can democratize. My hope for organizations is to appreciate that it really is possible to bottle up what these high performers do and transform every employee into these high performers. And on the individual side, it's to recognize that there's so much that school doesn't teach you and that your manager will expect of you, but that will never tell you, that we should be talking about and equipping ourselves to understand and be able to navigate.
Warwick, thank you so much for making the time to be here with us. I have really enjoyed not only this conversation, but the book itself. And just wanted to say that, we really appreciate you making the time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of Horizons.
Thank you so much, Krista. Wonderful chatting with you today, and looking forward to continuing this conversation with you, the GFF team, and the broader GFF community.